Here we are, podcast number what, Tommy?
Number 9.
Wow, fantastic. And we're dispensing with the things that we did to start the previous podcast with, just to keep it fresh, keep it fresh, keep it moving. In case you haven't noticed, if you've been listening to this podcast or watching, we don't get too in-depth in things. That's not what we want to do. We want to keep things moving. We want to offer enough topics where we have variety, and we have a kind of a maximum interest level offered, and at the same time go down with enough depth that we're interesting and you can get some substance out of it. So that's my basic parameter, right, Tommy?
Definitely, man.
Tommy is my boy, and I don't say that condescendingly. Tommy and I are really simpatico, and I love that we're doing this now. And we were just doing a pre-podcast check to see if some of the ideas that we're thinking about would work, and we just had an awesome rehearsal. It went swimmingly. Let's get into it. I listen and watch our podcasts to review them, to improve them. And personally, I have this, I'm all about changes. Okay. I'm a change worker. I'm a life coach. Well, I closed my coaching practice a couple of years ago, but I'm a change worker. I'm an NLP practitioner, neuro-linguistic programming. I'm all about helping me change myself and others change themselves if they'd like. And that can be a very difficult thing because we have patterns, we have habits. And until we become mindful of them, we can't change them. And once we want to change them, without being mindful continually, we won't change them. The patterns will dominate. They will continue to be what's in charge. For example, I listened to the podcast, and in the past till now, and be very careful, listen to my language. I'm very careful about my language. As an NLP practitioner, I learned this and I say this. Whatever I say about myself are instructions to myself. So I'm not going to say I make parasitic noises, because that's instructions to myself. I say instead, in the past, I made parasitic noises, because our mind is always listening for what we're saying. There's a loop going on in ourselves. So be very mindful about what you say about yourself. Be very mindful in general, but that takes a deliberate effort, a concerted effort to be mindful. We haven't articulated that that's one of our areas in the description of our podcast about being mindful. We talked about PMA, we talk about NLP. We haven't used that label, but that's a very important facet of what we're about, mindfulness. And that is to use thought about the present moment. That's what mindfulness is. And if we don't, our patterns and our habits will do just fine without any thought from us. They will dominate us. They will be in control, and not in a nefarious way, just in a psychological way. You don't have to do any thinking whatsoever in order to be active. What do I mean by active? I mean for your habits and your patterns to be busy as bees doing whatever. You could even be tranced out and later on, like not even remembering being there, but you were there. Your habits and your patterns were doing just fine without you, if you will. I mean, just think about like driving. Do you ever drive and then later on arrived at your destination, like, how did I get here? Do I not remember the drive? That's because you went into a trance, and you don't need to be mindful about your driving because it's so habituated for you. You can drive in a trance safely because you've conditioned yourself enough sufficiently to do that. When you were in your trance, you thought about something else, and before you know it, you're 3 hours over at Auntie's house. You're like, how did I get here? When did I get, so that's involving trance. But trance aside, the habits are in control. Mental patterns are in control. So this parasite that I'm talking about, I'm not talking about some evil, monstrous parasite or some science fiction parasite or true biological parasite. Talking about a psychological one, a kind of tick. And did you just ring me, Tommy?
Yeah, you just did it.
I did it. Okay, very good. I wasn't even aware of it. Now, Tommy was slightly ahead of the game because I haven't announced it. The tick I'm talking about is the audio noise of which a person may do when they are thinking of the next thing to say. Typically, could be other reasons. So I've listened to these podcasts, and that parasite, that sound parasite, I have it way too much. It annoys the hell out of me. It embarrasses me, especially as a linguist, as an orator. That noise needs to go. And this is not new to me. I've known this about myself for a long time. Yet it continues. Why? And the reason why is because I haven't been mindful enough about it. The patterns have continued. Even though I talk about this and that, and it may be of whatever intellectual value, the patterns are in effect, always in effect. And that pattern of speech, which is to have did it on purpose, Tommy, don't ring the bell.
Yeah.
I told Tommy and I have made an agreement. Now, this is a controversial thing. Yes, I'm being mindful, but I've asked Tommy to be my collaborator and ring a bell every time he hears me do this parasitic noise. It's like a stutter. It's not a stutter. It's just a parasitic noise that I make when I'm considering of what's the next thing to be said. So this is controversial for change workers, of which I am. I'm a change worker as a coach, as an NLP practitioner. And that is something that's called negative conditioning, where a person pays a penalty of some sort when they do an unwanted behavior. The most extreme of which is electroshocks, which I'm a big fan of, actually, on my own
Me
time.
too.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
That and a lobotomy.
I've had several. They never take. The old brain.
Teenage lobotomy.
What's that?
Teenage lobotomy.
The Ramones. And electroshock is an extreme example, but what is a common use of negative conditioning is a rubber band put a rubber band on the wrist and flick it when you catch yourself doing an unwanted behavior, gesture, tick, whatever, thought, could be a thought. Now, the thing about this is that you can anchor this. In NLP, we call it anchoring. In the lay terms, you call it conditioning, where whenever you have that feeling, if it's done sufficiently or with the proper, when there's enough feeling involved, you'll have that thought. The thought and the behavior or the feeling will be all enmeshed together. So that's a danger of that, and you don't want unless you're doing it very deliberately. And there's also the thought about behavioral change regarding negative conditioning, that it's not the better way to go. There are much better ways to go that don't involve inflicting pain or psychological distress on a person. And I'm totally down with that. However, I'm not against negative conditioning necessarily. I think that it can be useful, but you just have to consider the big picture and the consequences. It's always about the consequences. But right now, I'm willing to be vulnerable and put this out there because I think that by going first and sharing, going first is what I say that because I want to share with you, the listener, the viewer, the subscriber, on the primary vehicle of change for yourself. And that is by being mindful. Yes, we want to make these changes for ourselves, achieve goals, but what's in our way? Ourselves, ourselves. Mm-hmm. And what is it about ourselves? Is it this bad part of ourselves? No, it's these patterns It's these habits, psychological habits or behavioral habits, which are come from our psychology, from our mind, that are dominant. And the way to change that is by becoming mindful on varying levels. And what I'm doing now is being very mindful about this and giving Tommy authority, giving him lots of control or power to affect me by saying, Tommy, ring a bell every time you hear that audio parasite, that sound parasite. And we have to go through it first to see that, that it wouldn't be too distracting to you guys listening, watching, or to me as the person talking and coming up with some decent content for you to listen to or watch. And we thought that we accomplished that. And I think we're continuing that. What do you think, Tommy?
I think it's great. It was Tony brought it up that, he was uncomfortable with this parasite. It was my idea to implement the bell. I wish I had a different one, but this is I'm grateful for this wonderful bell.
I have the ending bell, by the way, if you can see. This
he's
is
got
the end of the podcast later on. Tommy will get a better bell for embarrassing me.
We are at 10 minutes right there.
That's
There's a different kind of bell.
Indicator. We strive to have about a 35-minute podcast, or less than 1/3 of the way through.
And I think this is great. I noticed that although I've done a lot of...
I heard your parasite.
You heard it in me?
I turned it around on you. I pulled the old switcheroo.
With the better bell. With me, my thing is staying still. I've noticed that visually, I move around a lot. For years, I used to tap my foot, my leg. I used to
hold on
constantly.
A second. How about I play the same game as you. We're doing this in real time. This is brand new. How about if I see you get antsy, if I see you moving around, I'll ring the bell, and now we'll pull that conditioning on you.
Yeah, I've noticed I do this, I do that, and I'm like, oh, I'm all over the place. And I was like, you know what? Why can't you just sit still? What are you like? Why are you ahead of yourself?
You mentioned your leg. I'm very observant. I strive to be. And when I see a person tapping their leg or shaking their leg, I strive to notice it. So I notice it a lot. And to me, the meaning I give it, which may or may not be accurate, is that they're nervous. They're nervous about something. Now, maybe they're not nervous about something in particular. Maybe they're just nervous habitually.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that they are thinking about a particular thing. Maybe maybe they have a neurosis, right? And they're just nervous all the time. But to me, it means that they're nervous about something. And in terms of, I don't want to take it from you. Did you get me? Very good. Yeah. we're gonna have a bell war, a ring war.
Oh.
Good. Yeah, you ring the bell. We'll just shoot. Let's just throw arrows at each other. You guys who are listening to this, you gotta watch this.
Oh man.
You gotta watch this on YouTube if you're only listening on the audio. And I notice when people, I always strive to notice things about a person. As an NLP practitioner, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, a bedrock of it is to pay great attention to people, all little details, all little nuances, down to the little thing. One of the exemplars, which is what the founders studied, key, very successful people. They were all psychologists and therapists in the 70s, and how they were so great, you notice that their kind of results could be replicated. And one of these main guys was Milton Erickson, who was considered one of the greatest hypnotherapists. And it's said that he was giving a story about a woman that he treated and where the result that she wanted. And a student asked him, well, when did you notice that she changed states? And he said, well, I noticed the blood vessel in her ankle changed the pulse. Yeah. So I don't know if that's true. It could be just an NLP myth, But that's the kind of nuance I'm talking about. That's the kind of detail I'm talking about. I'm talking about detail, the thickness of lips, that kind of detail, eye dilation, all this kind of stuff. But bigger than that is when I see a person move around in their seat while they're responding to a question. That's a tell. That's a tell to me. That tells me that they're having somewhat of a strong reaction to the question. What it means, I don't know. I'm not a mind reader. NLP doesn't teach mind reading. It teaches a lot of things, not mind reading. Mind reading is not one of them. And matter of fact, NLP teaches you not to pretend that you're a mind reader. One of the things that we people like to do is pretend that we know what someone else is thinking. It is just a pretense. It's just an act of the ego. We don't know what other people are thinking. We can hear what they say. We can watch what they do, which is the biggest truth teller of their actions. But those are those things. We cannot read minds. That's one of the things I remember. And the guy who introduced NLP to me was my acting mentor. My first time I even had a mentor was this acting teacher, and this is the guy behind Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman. For you young people who don't know, these guys were huge stars in the 70s onward. And he introduced NLP to me, which blew me away and fascinated me in the mid-90s. Anyway, one of the things he had us students do was to stand on stage. We were all acting students. We were all acting professional. We weren't necessarily professional, but it was a renowned school, a 2-year school. And ring me, Tommy. I heard myself make the parasite.
Oh, I didn't hear
it. It was faint, but it was slight. But,
okay.
So he would have us stand on stage and look at the audience and say, "You don't know what I'm thinking." It's a very powerful exercise to stand in front of people, multiple people, and say, "You look at them. You don't know what I'm thinking." Because a lot of people, it's very useful as an actor. It's very useful as a psychologist or a kind of psychologist, but it's very useful for any person because a lot of people they think that, it seems to me, they have some sort of shame or fear. No, fear. Fear is the word, not shame, about what they're thinking if somebody was to discover it, somebody else. And I've got good news for you, my friends. Nobody's going to discover it. Nobody is going to discover it. All your thoughts are completely private, and it's only up to you to reveal them. That said, again, your actions tell the truth about you. But you might be very clever and say, "Let me make actions that are deceptive." That's true, but ultimately the truth will come out. The truth will come out.
Right.
Bigger and bigger pictures. So, Tommy, did you have something?
Yeah, I always wondered, it always fascinated me why, because everyone says it, almost everyone I hear, they say, "I don't like the way I look in this picture," or, "Oh, I hate the way my voice sounds." And I always wonder why, what is it about it, a person's connection to themselves, where they're initially put off or even lasting, as you said, it's pervasive.
Oh, no, wait. You did the other for me. You're the.
But do it to me as well, because it works either way,
We're gonna Tommy and I are gonna make ourselves perfect orators, where we don't do any parasitic noises nor any
sniffles.
I did it myself, Tommy. You were on top of me.
So where am I?
Visual.
Yes. Yeah, the people are put off by themselves initially, or even if you don't fix it, you continuously don't like the way you look in pictures or in whatever. And what do you think that is? Why do you think people?
I think that, a person's insecurities, a person wants to be, have a high standard for themselves, which is awesome, or have an idea of perfection, not awesome. And if they don't, in their visitation of this recorded material or imagery, they don't get that, they can feel insecure or less than.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. But I think what's even more common is the awfulness, which I talk about quite often, of self-righteousness. And what is this self-righteousness? It's just that you think that you're right and that it's unquestionable, and you don't need to even have strong explanations of why you're right. That you're right. You can find the explanations if you go looking for them. That's self-righteousness, basically.
Okay.
And when we look at imagery from ourselves, of ourselves in the past, we may be doing something or dressed a certain way, doing whatever, or looking a certain way, and we feel embarrassed by it because it's doing something different than what you're doing now, or looking different now. And what's the disconnect? What's the difference? Well, now you're so right. I'm so right in what I'm doing now. I'm so right in how I'm looking now. And since I look different in that image, or I'm doing something different in that image, that must be wrong because it's different from now. And now I'm right.
Right.
You see? Because you don't transport your self-righteousness into the past of when that image or imagery or video was taken. You're having that self-righteous now, which is
20 minutes.
Is a delusion, or it's a delusion. It's an illusion of the ego, or it could be worse, illusion or delusion. But it's just the way you think about yourself now, is that you are so right. You're not being fair to yourself, or even you're not being fair to yourself, number one, and you're not being honest either. And that you're always right and you're always wrong. You're always bad and you're always good. You know, you can embrace that part of you, that aspect of you, that truth of you, is that you're all these things, all four of these things simultaneously. Then you can look at something from the past, or hear your voice, or see video, see pictures, and say, there I was 10 years ago. Oh, I can hear my voice now with the parasitic noises or the stutters, and okay, there were stutters, there were parasitic noises, and just take it in stride and just observe it without making a judgment. It's
judgment. It's a big thing.
Which has to judge against what? Against your own self-righteousness. So if it doesn't compare well to your self-righteousness now, then it has to be judged poorly.
Yeah. That image of yourself that you thought was so beautiful and wonderful it's not parallel, or doesn't match what you're seeing in that video.
And if you could transport yourself into the past, say you're hearing an audio of yourself, audio recording of yourself from 20 years ago. If you could transport 20 years previously, you most probably, not necessarily, felt about yourself however you felt. You probably felt good about what you were doing, or that you were doing something right and correctly. And you should have, without being egotistical. But coming back and going into the future 20 years, which is where you are now, looking back 20 years. Now, if you judge yourself poorly using that same sort of standard, well, that really invalidates the self-righteousness that you had then.
Yeah.
Right? When were you right? Were you right now, or were you right then? The answer is, the truth is that you were right neither time, or you were right and wrong simultaneously. Okay? The point I'm making is that your judgment of this stuff is all bullshit.
It's an illusion.
It's an illusion. It's not the truth. It's not the truth. It's an act of your ego.
Yeah.
It's non-truth. It's just some shit that you're coming up with now.
Because you are who you are regardless all the time.
That's it. That's it. With all your wonderful imperfections. That's it. Yep. And whoever you are, every step of your life, every 365 days a year, for the amount of years your life is, is who you are at that moment in time. Okay. And bear in mind, you're always more than that, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Is that you are a process.
Yeah.
You are an evolving person from day one, since the day you came out of that vaginal canal.
Mm.
All right. Even before that, as a fetus,
Yeah.
you're always evolving and processing. So allow it to happen. Don't judge yourself negatively. That would just be an act of the ego. The ego is not
Self-defeating.
Say what?
Self-defeating.
It's
a self-defeating.
It is counterproductive to you for you to judge yourself negatively in any way. In any way. If you've done things that you regret, great. Change your behaviors. Make apologies. Make restitutions. If you think you can do better, awesome. Start today.
Yeah.
Don't get bogged down with your own BS. That's, by the way, that's a lot to do with being with the name of our podcast, One Truth. A lot of times we confuse our bullshit for the truth. It's not the truth. It's just our bullshit. Things that we say to ourselves, which maybe comfort to ourselves in the moment, maybe soothe ourselves, maybe just feeds our ego. None of these things are true. They're not true. They're just things that we're doing now for those reasons. Okay, I think we've covered that enough. Now,
yeah, definitely.
One thing it's a resumption. Last podcast, Monday, Tommy and I made the first goal for ourselves, which is to get 100 subscribers to the podcast through Apple. It has to be, at this point, it has to be through Apple Podcast, and which is also iTunes. But I think that marries with Google. I'm not sure. We're learning this podcast thing, and we're doing that. But I failed to include an essential part of goal making, and that is what, Tommy?
Our deadline.
Deadline. We must make a deadline. A goal without a deadline is just a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you don't. The big mistake that people make is they get, if they have a goal without a deadline, they get caught up in activity and forget what the result is because they think the activity is enough. It's not. If you'll know that if you work, if you have a job and you're being active, like, oh, I'm being active, but your boss notices you're not having the result that they want, they'll let you know. Guess what? You're climbing up the wrong, you're barking up the wrong tree. You're doing the wrong thing. Don't major in minor things. You're doing something for a specific outcome. So you don't want to get bogged down with activity if you're not getting the traction towards the result you want. And you do that by having a deadline. If I want 100 subscribers and I'm jerking around with one thing and I'm not making progress towards my goal, then I've got to stop that and I got to do something else. By the way, that's an NLP technique.
I love that. Don't major in minor things.
That's a problem that many people have, majoring in minor things. You don't want to do that. You want to focus on the more important things. But a basic NLP technique, which they didn't originate. NLP didn't originate most of the stuff that they espoused. They codified it. Is that whenever you're doing something and you're not getting the result that you want, then you should do something else. Anything else. It doesn't matter what it is. Just do anything else because that doesn't work, or at least the way you've been doing it. So you wanted to try something else. It doesn't matter if it's punching yourself in the face. I'm being facetious, but don't,
Slightly.
Don't be limited by your own imagination. You've got to think outside the box. You've got to imagine other possibilities, to have other possibilities. Don't be constrained by previous ideas. In order to, if your previous ideas were so great, how come you don't have the thing now? How's that? Ooh, that one bites. That one bites right there.
Yeah.
So think open-minded. I'm a former paratrooper, and an analogy that I like to use is that a parachute only works properly when it's open, just like the mind. The mind and the parachute are very similar. They only work properly when they're open. So open your mind. So if you're not getting what you want, do anything different. But getting back to the focus here, which is deadlines, is that you must make deadlines for yourself, because That is the outcome. You don't just want a goal. You want it to happen soon enough, whatever that may be. And by making a deadline, you build urgency, and you need urgency. By having a deadline, you add focused
Urgency.
work, continual work, because that is probably going to get you more results than anything else. Consistent and continuous work. And
deadline is the death of fantasy.
Well, yes. Well, a goal without deadline is a fantasy.
Yeah.
And if you recall what I was talking about in Facebook Live yesterday, I believe it was, Tommy, is that fantasies are great, but if we're going to have fantasies about things in the future, then we have to be taking action now, and then that's awesome. Otherwise, they're just fantasies. They're just ways to waste your time, and that's all it is. And if you're having fantasies about things in the past and you're having problems with feelings, well, stop doing that, because that fantasizing about things in the past is just ways not to feel the feelings.
All right.
You know, the addicts.
Obsessing.
Right. Addicts take drugs or do whatever their addictions are, primarily as a way not to feel feelings. And the non-drug or the non-addictive behavior way of not feeling your feelings is obsession.
30 minutes.
We're at 30 minutes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
You know, that's it. So deadlines are a necessary thing. So let's thank you, Tommy. Thank you very much.
Yes,
wow, I'm doing fantastically.
You're doing great.
Wow, this is great. So
We're
now
both
it's
doing great.
Well, mostly me. No, I'm kidding. Tommy, you're awesome. Now it's Tommy's corner. It's time for the Tao Te Ching passage number which?
Number 9, just like the podcast.
Yes.
Let's I'll run
Tommy
through
will
it.
read from this awesome tome. 2,500 years ago it was written.
Yes, sir. I'm going to read through in its entirety, and then we can unpack. As for holding to fullness, far better were it to stop in time. Keep on beating and sharpening a sword, and the edge cannot be preserved for long. Fill your house with gold and jade, and it can no longer be guarded. Set store by your riches and honor, and you will only reap a crop of calamities. Here is the way of heaven. When you have done your work, retire.
Wow, a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
Let's go through it. And I've buzzed myself. I've rung myself. Yeah. And let's not get bogged down with it. So let's keep it moving. We don't want to go too deep. We don't want to spend too much time. So
we got 5 stanzas, I believe they're called. A stanza.
Perhaps. Let's disassemble with the good pace.
As for holding to fullness, far better were it to stop in time.
I don't know what that means.
Wow.
You know what that means?
I don't either. I don't. It's
repeat it one more time.
As for holding to fullness, which means, I guess, in regards to holding to fullness.
What's the previous verse? What is he referencing?
That's the first verse.
Is he previously the previous chapter?
They're all their own entities.
They're all okay. Go on.
Yeah, they really don't. They're not. There's no continuity to it. Each passage is its own poem.
It's independent. Go on.
Yeah. As for holding to fullness, far better were to stop in time.
You want to go to that? What about you did that method you used last time? You paraphrased it by doing searching it on the internet.
Yeah, let me check that.
Okay. Well, Tommy does that.
Tao Te Ching, passage 9. Okay. Filling all the way to the brim, it is not as good as halting in time.
Now the paraphrase has illuminated it for me. So they're saying, Lao Tzu is saying, don't be greedy. Don't go for maximum grab when something, when a sufficiency is plenty,
Yes.
right? Don't get greedy. Don't be gluttonous.
Pounding an edge to sharpness will not make it last.
That is in the same vein, right? You can sharpen your sword, and now it's sharp. Once it's sharp, it's sharp. You don't need to sharpen anymore. As a matter of fact, you can degrade the sharpness by making it so sharp because it won't hold up. It loses strength by making it so sharp. So don't overkill things. This is very useful stuff. Both of those passages. Actually, now I'm so glad you went to that paraphrase. That it's become clear to me. Go on.
Yeah. Hold on. Keeping plenty of gold and jade in the palace makes no one able to defend it.
Well, to me, my interpretation of that is that if we make a palace here, the metaphor is a palace, or maybe literal. If we're just using it as some sort of vault, then it's lost its purpose, right? And it becomes difficult to do other
defend.
things. Well, defend in this case, but not necessarily. You could transcribe that. You could overlay that on other contexts, right?
Yeah.
You can just lose other abilities when you get so caught up on one thing.
Absolutely.
Especially something as that could just be about greed, and which is not unwanted. You don't want to have greed; it's a deadly sin. I continue.
Displaying riches and titles with pride brings about one's downfall. Pride, man, greed and pride.
Well, pride is there are 7 deadly sins. Pride is the worst.
That's true.
I love titles. And what was the other one? Positions?
Titles and riches.
Oh, riches. I love titles.
Yeah.
I love titles when you use them to imply responsibilities and roles, because that in an organization or a structure is an essential thing. So in that regard, I love them, love them. I have we have a military background, so I love military structure. I love organizational structure. That said, beyond that, if we're using it for vanity and for ego, for dominance, that's going to be ultimately
problematic.
Detrimental. It's going to be problematic, definitely. Other people are going to say at some point, "Hey, screw you." That's a boomerang. Your ego is a boomerang. It's going to come back and hit you right in the face. So you got to consider things. I'm ringing myself. I'm fast under. I got the bell right here.
Yeah.
Tommy has to pick it up. He has a glass ringer. I got like a clerk.
I'm holding it in my hand, but
He wants to beat me. I'm loving self-humiliation. You forgot that I'm a great masochist, sadist. Now this is masochism and sadism. So I'm both the sadist and the masochist right here.
Yeah. Oh man, it's great. There's one last.
Okay.
The last line is, to retreat after a work well done is heaven's way.
Right.
So
we need to relax. We need to recharge. Our time has to have multiple parts, facets to be a whole. And there needs to be, after an advance, there needs to be some sort of retreat. Not a kind of where you give up lost territory. Well, that's not, I think that's a military metaphor. That's not the best one. Not a part where you lose anything, but you recharge, you relax. You do something else besides being so objective, so anal about something. It's so obsessive.
Moderation and modesty are 2 words I get from today's passage. Modesty and moderation.
Absolutely. Moderation. You've got to, I talked about George Morrison earlier. What was one of his advices to us acting students was to have a life outside acting, which was very great advice. Some of us were like, oh, acting, oh, acting. He would say, have a life outside acting. And that thing is to relax, recharge, try to have balance in your life, try to have a full life. Very good. Excellent stuff. Great stuff. So that was the Tao Te Ching passage number 9, correct?
Yeah. Taoism and Zen is difficult, but it's rewarding.
And that's the great stuff. This is our fresh and spontaneous reception of that. And we have these quick interpretations, but really the greater value is to let that stuff germinate and contemplate on this stuff. You know, even revisit this podcast or these passages subsequently. That's where the greater value is for us and for you listeners and viewers. Okay, great stuff, Tommy. Thank you. Now it's time for the ending, which is we're going to read our daily passage, right? I'm going to select from the box here. Pick the passage. Oh, I got to see all the stuff I have written on the back of this too.
Yes.
Now, here's the picture, another mountain climber, I think. Oh, some guy's jumping over an abyss between two giant boulders on a mountain. But on the back of it, I have written awareness, acceptance, affirm, river, positivity. All this stuff, it makes no sense in this context, so we'll just forget about it. Let's read the passages. It is from Amelia Earhart, right? That was the
nice
creator, right, of the 30s. She said, courage is the price that life exacts for granting peace. Ooh. Let's think about that in opposite. By the way, is there an echo over there? No. Okay.
No.
Let's go reverse on that. She said, did you just ring me?
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't even realize.
You're welcome.
Granting peace. So she's saying peace. Peace is the thing that you can presume that most people want, if not everyone. So peace is the outcome, right? So what precedes that? Something that's granted, right? So peace, it's not something that's just taken or given, but granted somehow. Preceding that, there's a cost, price that life exacts. There's a cost, right? And what is it? The first word.
Courage.
Courage. So what does she mean by that? To me, well, I am one of those people who highly values courage. It's at the very top of my values, of my hierarchy of values. It's in the top 3. And quite frankly, a lot of times I don't live up to it. I'm not going to pretend I'm, Lionheart. But I value
it's a strange quote. I don't associate the two. It's weird.
Well, that's how stupid you are. I'm kidding. I cancel. I retract that. I'm only joking with my comrade. And yes, you're right. It doesn't seem to go together. For me, it does because I'm familiar with this. And I have a lot of time to think about this. And I'll repeat it, and then I'll disassemble forward back. I just went backwards, but I'm going to repeat it, and then we'll go forward disassembly. Courage is the price that life exacts for granting peace. Peace is something that is very often elusive for people. And we're talking about self-peace here, right? It can be a greater self-peace. That's what she's referring to. And we have to change in order to have peace. Well, that becomes evident. That's the proposition. Without courage to make the change, it is often, if not difficult, impossible.
Why
is that?
I think I'm getting it now.
Why is that? Because we have to give up our former selves, which is a self that lacks the peace, in order to become the self that has the peace. That can be very scary. If I'm not the me that I'm familiar with, the me that I'm supposed to become or must become, what if I don't like that me? What if that's too difficult to become that me or to stay that me? Those are the fears that we may have, the thoughts that we may have that daunt us or cause us to have fear and say, "Oh, I don't want to change. I'm not willing to walk out in that place where I can have to suffer the slings and arrows of that change. I'm not willing to go on to a thinner ice to get out of this quote unquote safe ice, even though I can hear it cracking beneath me, but at least I know if I don't move, I'm not going to step on thinner ice, right?
Yeah.
But that may be the only recourse, is to take a step on a foreign area that the ice may be thinner. But even though the ice may be thinner, it doesn't mean you'll fall through, right? But to become something different, someone different, to do something different, we have to face perhaps the greatest fear, and that is the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
The fear of the unknown.
It.
We don't know what's going to happen, what that's going to be like. We have to have a faith. We have to have a trust in something. And if we just succumb to the fear, we won't do it. But the great news is just as Amelia Earhart articulated, is that we don't need to become a Lionheart. We just need to have enough courage to face our fear and to take that next step.
Mm-hmm.
Take the next step. It's not this massive bounty of fear, of courage that's required, but just enough to take the next step in the direction that we want to go, in shedding the skin of as if we were snakes, to become the more maturing snake, to become the better self, requires some level of courage to go to that next point in evolution.
Mm-hmm. True peace comes from courage.
Absolutely. Hey, do you recall the brief version of the Serenity prayer from the rooms?
The brief version? I remember the prayer.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change
the things I can.
So what is needed to change the things that you can? Courage.
Courage.
It's right there in the prayer.
Yeah.
It's necessary. That's the necessary ingredient. That's the formula. To change the things that you can requires courage. And the final part of that brief version is
wisdom.
And the wisdom to know the difference. So there you go. Burn it into your psyche. I'm going to burn the paper that the passage is written on. Symbolically, burn it as this paper burns in my hand. Burn it into your psyche. That courage is a necessary thing for you to have. Not so much where you're some sort of warrior, but enough to take the next step in the direction that you want to go, in becoming the person that you want to be.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's it. Fantastic. My dear comrade, Tommy, I think it was another wonderful podcast.
Definitely. Congratulations on our 9th podcast, and thank you for the 50 downloads altogether on Buzzsprout.
He's speaking to you guys there. And by the way, I really love this vulnerability that we just did and shared with our listeners and viewers. I think
it helps with
really
multitasking.
Wonderful thing. So I really commend ourselves for doing that, to make ourselves vulnerable and to talk about things that embarrass us.
Absolutely.
That's a wonderful thing to share with people. So I thank you, Tommy. Much love to you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our subscribers. We really appreciate this. So if you like this, please like it somehow on Facebook or on the podcast. I just got my bell there. And
yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere, whichever. We're on like 6 different ways now. Listings, and we're going to get more for you to subscribe. And please share it. Share it to anyone who you think could benefit from this kind of stuff or be entertained by this kind of stuff. That's it. Tommy, anything else?
That's it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And here's our closing bell. I love it.